Several months ago, one of the great new professors at Kent State in the geography department is Dr. Mapes, Jennifer Mapes. She wrote a book called The New American Small Town. And Jennifer's been helping us at the Historical Society just wonderfully ever since she got to Kent. She's a real community activist. And it really made me rethink how we had been teaching the history of Kent. And I think what we're going to do today, my trusty wingman here, Henry, we're going to try to talk about the first 100 years of our history. But I'm going to try to do it in a different way so you get a different look at how the people who came here helped to create what we are as a community, at least foundationally. And that was happening in the first 100 years. So we're going to take you through it, but we're going to do a little different job than we would have done in the past. For instance, in the past, I would have started with, in 1805, the Haymaker family came here. I'm not going to do that today. Henry, let's change this. A river runs through it. There is no Kent without the Cuyahoga. People came here. All great cities in the world are built on water. It's a very simple, practical reason. It was the only way to make transportation prior to other forms. So the Cuyahoga, we are very blessed to have because it became a real draw. Now, I normally wouldn't have started with this, but I'm going to start with this because of this part in here is the Northwest Territory, and I really never paid much attention to it. But I began to look and think, who were the people who came here, and why did they come here? There's a very simple reason. I'm going to do it quickly. But this territory was won from the French, British, and other states that gave it up after the American Revolution. And so they wanted to create, out of this huge amount of territory, 3 to 5 states. Now that's important because they wanted to balance off the slave states in the South. So there was a real rush to get people to move here. There was a tremendous rush. At the same time, there were other people here. Now, as you see, it then became the Northwest Territories up here. Here's the Connecticut Western Reserve. Why is this little piece cut out? Because Connecticut was given by the kings of England in the 1700s, and they kept that little piece and said, we want Connecticut, we want it. So actually, the first people who were going to come here were being given that advantage and coming from Connecticut. Now, the people who were already here happen to have been in our area, primarily the Senecas and the Iroquois Indian. Now, by the time, let's go back just for a moment, 12 to 14,000 years ago, when the last ice age receded and the Cuyahoga River became the Cuyahoga River, we have evidence that there were the first peoples living here, indigenous people, very soon, within several 1,000 years of that recession. So these people were here. Now, if the United States of America says we want to populate this really fast, there's one thing they have to do: get rid of these people. And that's an important part because we get to our next myth, and that's this man. We have a real problem. When I first came here 56 years ago, everybody was talking about John Brown, and everybody was talking about Captain Brady. But Captain Brady's become a lot more difficult for us to discuss because Captain Brady was very heroic when we came. It was very heroic to be outwitting the Native Americans and hiding in the water. By the way, there's 2 of the same story of that, one in Pennsylvania, one here. But the reality is that Captain Brady was a part of the United States government decision to try to move the Native American and indigenous people out as quickly as possible so that new settlers could move in. So what he was doing before we were a state was chasing Native Americans, and they were rebelling and trying not to get caught. So it's difficult. The one thing I can say and still say to people and young kids is, he could really jump across the river. And I can say that with great, and I can be proud of that. It was a great high jumper. But the rest of it is a little murky because it's built into that terrific problem we have when we talk about manifest destiny, which is ocean to ocean. Here we have one of the prized possessions, if you come to the Historical Society, I will bore you with. This is one of the first maps ever made. There were only 30 hand-drawn maps. Now this part here actually belonged to Virginia. And you see all these little grids? Those grids were made by Thomas Jefferson, who actually gridded everything new that came in. They did it in little squares. And this part was part of Virginia. So all of the people that were moving in came from Virginia, which was a slave-holding state. All the people up here who came in, where it says New Connecticut, even before Western Reserve, were people who came from Connecticut, which was not a slave-holding state. So they had different mindsets when they moved into Ohio. I think it's really important when you think about the people who come here, because they come with a certain value system that then infuses the community. So over here we have a little thing that says Indian lands. That did not work out as well at all. The Indian lands were consistently given over and over. They redid treaties, and broke the treaties, and inch by inch they moved them west and committed one of the worst crimes in the world. They moved them to Indiana. Now anybody who's been on the Indiana Expressway and had to go to a stop there knows that's a horrible fate. But seriously, moving them across and further west. So I think before I get to the haymakers, I want to show you why we even exist and who the people were who were encouraged to come here first. So here's Portage County. Now, I told you they wanted it fast. And one of the reasons they were giving the land away so cheaply was because they didn't want to pay the Revolutionary War, people who fought, the soldiers. So they gave them land at really good prices. So $2.50, that's what the haymakers paid for an acre to move into what was then Franklin Township. Now we were Franklin Township because Aaron Olmsted came here, measured the whole thing. Everything was in grids. That's old Thomas Jefferson did it little grids. And he then goes back. He hoped that what we know as Kent now would be the county seat. He went back and died when he got back. And then they changed it, and they changed it to Ravenna. He wanted it here because it was essentially still in the middle of what was called Portage County. Now you'll notice there is a confusion in your mind. Here's Hudson. That's not in Portage County. It was in Portage County. It was moved later. We actually were taken from Trumbull County because the movement kept moving west. Started in the Far East and you keep moving west. Okay, so now we've got little Franklin Township here. And nobody lives here, and a couple of people are here, but nobody's in what we know as Kent. And along comes Jacob Haymaker. Jacob was a German carpenter. He and his wife, Mary, and their 3 children come to Kent. Now, this is the part I want you to think about. I try to tell the kids this when we educate it. There is no one else here. It is nothing but trees and the river. And so they come in, they have 3 children, and the only place they take was this little cabin that was left over from the surveyor's and the Indians who had been here, Native Americans who had come through and kept their horses there. So the first 9 months they lived in something that, if you can imagine what it was not only pretty ghastly and barren, but honestly, there was no one else. There was no one for you to talk to but each other and the 3 kids. And I find that really important to impress on the kids, that you didn't go out anywhere, that was it. So then we have this amazing decade, and I'm trying to do this thing more in, rather than just a date and who did it or what happened. Now, everything that happened was a first. Everything was a first. It was so exciting. We have the first settlers, the first dam that they built, the first child is born, death, and then the War of 1812 comes, and it slows settlers for a while because the war basically was whether the Native Americans, indigenous people, were still going to be here, and people were afraid to come. Once that was settled, they had the Indian Relocation Act. They were pretty sure nobody was around. Some of them stayed and hid or changed as much as they could, but basically they were mostly gone. By 1813, we have the sawmill, the wedding, the first election. Only men could vote. So there were 12 guys sat around a room. Somebody got elected, but it was the township they were voting for. It was Franklin Township. It still was not in any way, shape, or form either a village or in any way, shape, or form a town. Then we get, in 1817, there are only 6 families living here. And what is the first thing they do? And this relates to values. They start a school. And they build a building that has the first school for anybody that wants to go to it. And they also have the first church services in there for any denomination. That's when everybody was still talking to each other. So it was very exciting to me to see that. If I put it in kind of a context, this is a value that we have continued throughout the city, that education was important. So that was around where Lake and Crane come together. We have a dye shop, a cabinet shop, a stage, oh, and then I'll get to the stagecoach. But everything had to be either created from your family, you were growing, you were killing animals to eat, you were getting water from the Cuyahoga, you were washing, you were doing these things. If you wanted to go to the store, you had to go 6 miles by horse or walk to Ravenna. That was the only store. So you're basically very isolated and you're very much independent. Okay, first stagecoach comes. Okay, this is just an idea of how people did not have money. They did not have hard cash. So sugar, look at these. The cheapest thing on here is whiskey, of course. And this shows you that basically what was happening was barter. I give you something you want, I make it, you give me something I need. Now, if you wanted to get hard cash, there was really only one thing. That was go out and kill an animal and sell the fur. So you've got here, and you can see the poor little muskrats only worth a quarter. You know, they were gone quickly. Wolves were $7 to $10. That's pretty great. So if you get a wolf, you can see how fast the wolves were going to go. But this was a way of actually selling. And you think there are very, very few ways you can make money. So here we have a prototypical look at what early Kent looked like. This is the first actual photograph we have. As you notice, this is probably down near Columbus Avenue, and that's probably going up the hill. But they're small houses. They're a few windows. They're simple. They're near each other. They have gardens. The dam is always the first thing. They need power. And with power, you can always build the grist mill, because the second thing you cannot hunt is bread. You want bread. Everybody wants bread. You need flour. So the flour mill is always the first thing that comes here. But the first people who came here were individuals starting a grist mill, or they started a little shop. It was one or two people. It was all they knew. There was no plan to this. It was quite just helter-skelter at that point. In the 20s, we begin to coalesce a little bit, and you begin to see something kind of coming together. Franklin Mills is accepted as the name. Now, why do I say that? Because there was an upper village and a lower village. They were 1 mile apart, as you'll see later. But the upper village was Carthage, lower village was down by the Stowe Street Bridge. That was the Franklin Mills. Carthage actually tried to get it to be the name, but they preferred Franklin Mills. I have to agree with them, it's nice. Anyway, we get a postmaster, George DePeister. We get a general store, but it fails very quickly. We get a glass factory. Why do we get a glass factory? Because geography is destiny. We have water, but we also have great sand. If you move about an hour south, you get great clay, so you get pottery factories. We have great sand, so we get glass factories. If you get glass, you can put it in your house, you can decorate it, but you can put it in a little window. So these are important things when you have very simple lives. The term Underground Railroad starts to be used in the 1820s, and I want to be very clear about this. As long as there was slavery, there were people escaping. Generally, those people were helped by other African people who were also had freed themselves and came back to bring them. They didn't start calling it the Underground Railroad until Caucasians get in it. And then they give it a name and, you know, we do ads or whatever it is. But this had always been since we had slavery. And the Underground Railroad begins, we do have the first, we only have 2 stories about the Underground Railroad in Kent. And they're both very good, wonderful stories. One in the 1820s and one in the 1850s. And they talk about escaping slaves who came through us. We knew that we were on the route, but we were, the mecca of this part was in Hudson. Hudson was the hotbed, and they were extremely well organized. Remember, again, when you go back to who settled it, we have Quakers who are intensely against slavery, and we have people from Connecticut who tended to be very, very anti-slavery and tended to be people who were very organized about it and in touch with New England, which was where the abolition movement was strong. So it made sense. Now here I wanted to explain to you. So we have these 3 taverns. I love it. We only have like about 20 people, but we've got 3 taverns, just like it today. So here we have the Cuyahoga House, which is located right now where it's the Black Squirrel restaurant, the new
Blind Squirrel.
Blind Squirrel, sorry, Blind Squirrel, not Black Squirrel. So we got that. And we had the Woodard Tavern, which was here. That was on this side of near the Green Street Bridge. Down near the Stowe Street Bridge, which is only a mile apart, we had the Lincoln Tavern. And they were competing. I mean, they're only a mile apart, but they're competing. There's 20 people, they're competing. But we had a stagecoach route. The one stagecoach route from Ravenna took you this way and stopped at the Lincoln. This stagecoach route took you to the Boudoir Tower. So if you got on one in Ravenna, you went one way, and if you got on the other one, in the middle of the night, you weren't going to walk a mile. I'm telling you, you were not. There were no roads that were that good. So even at that time, it was critically important what happened, whether you got on that stagecoach or this stagecoach. Now, Franklin Mills becomes a village. So the first basic 30 years, we are just individuals moving here, trying to make a life. 1830 to 1860, this 30-year period, we actually became a village. So let's go to the next one, Hen. One of the most important milestones is 1832. Two things that are the most dangerous to a village are fire and flood. In 1832, there's a flood. And as I said, the people who came before were individuals and they built, but they were very crude compared to what they needed. So this flood, which was 61 feet on the Ohio River, comes up. Cuyahoga is very shallow. We get a terrible flood. It washes away everything that had been done in those first 25 years. And everybody just goes, okay, I'm giving up. The haymakers are going to go be farmers. I'll sell my land cheap. I want to get out of here. And this is when Zenas Kent decides to come to Kent. Zenas Kent was in Ravenna. And Zenas Kent was an amazing person who needed to start a new place that was from scratch. So here we have in 1832, the dam, the sawmill, the woolen mill, the dye house, the cabinet shop, the fort, all washed away. It's all gone. Here we go. Here's Zenas and Marvin. Now, I've always said these are good people because they really did care about the community, as you will hear. But even more, I think their gift and our gift was that these were people who were planners. They wanted to bring things, they had a plan, not just my little business, but I see a plan for a town. And that was what was really different from everybody else. They were leaders. So that was his son, and we're going to start with Zenas. Let's show you what Zenas built. This gorgeous building, this beautiful, think about that, 1830. People here are building log cabins. He's building this Greek revival style courthouse in Ravenna. I was blown away. I had never really looked at it to see who was the person that came here and changed our lives. What a craftsman. And if you see, there's a real sense of New England here. He really is a person from New England. Not, he wasn't building something that looked like it was from, a southern plantation. So he builds this, but then the flood washes everything out, and he says, aha, if I go to over there, just 6 miles, to this little place called Franklin Mills, I could really start from scratch, because Ravenna had stuff. So he did. And this is what, at the same time, the big rumor in the whole country was canal. That was going to change all of our lives, was going to be the canal. It was connected to the ocean and to the Great Lakes. And the idea that you could become so wealthy, the idea that you could become connected to Canada, connected to the Atlantic Ocean, to Great Britain, people were getting high on these dreams. They were really crazy big because it was nothing and they so much wanted to be connected. So we get the talk of canal fever. That's really what it was. It was when you hear what they came to, you know there were a little bit of fever here. Okay, next. Here is the lovely canal. It is boom and bust in the 1830s. The 1830s, they're land crazy. They're buying land, they're selling land. It's just going back and forth, sometimes 5 times in the same 10-year period. Eventually, this of course comes later, but here we go with that Cuyahoga. It's right in the middle of our progress again. Zenas Kent, now 1832, he comes. First thing he does is get a partner. And he gets this, he purchases all this land that was lost in the flood and sold cheaply. It's water power. He also bought the water rights. Everybody always bought the water rights. Can't get those now. Zenas buys with his friend David Ladd, and they all decide to start this thing called the Franklin Land Company. Now, wildcat banking is very important to understand. There were no banking laws. No banking law. You could start a bank. They were starting and blowing out all the time, all over the country. So, that Zenas buys it, sells all of his land to the Franklin Land Company, who then sells all the land to the Franklin Silk Company, right? Henry, are we right?
Yep.
We get, this is the greatest dream of all. Oh, so he has a plan, and he has a whole plan for the river. This whole plan for the river. The river from all the way down to all the way up to where the Main Street Bridge is. He's going to be building these mills. Very New England, by the way. Mills are New England. So he gives you a flour mill. It's really kind of a grist mill, right? And it's kind of a corn. It's not real great. A little on the gritty side. But see the water? Using that water power? Over here is the tannery. Had a big fight with a guy in town. I was only here 3 years. I was just turning 30. Guy said, that wasn't the John Brown tannery. There was never a tannery in there. People only remember in their lifetime. Sorry about that. John Brown was commissioned by Zenas Kent. He was only known as a tanner to build this tannery. And unfortunately, because we chased all of the indigenous people, we didn't get any knowledge that this was built on a 100-year floodplain. That's when you think you're so smart. So you build it right down there and it just floods. You know, it's great, really intelligent. But it makes a great, now, kayaking place. Terrific, they found the right place for it. So here we have this. And next, the canal. The construction of the canal begins in 1836. Now, they're starting to build it. People are coming to town. A lot of Irishmen are brought in. Remember, whenever we want cheap labor, where do we go? Overseas. We like to get foreign people because they're cheaper. They bring them here. The Irish are building the canal. Their people are coming here. We got doctors and lawyers and banks, and everybody's moving here, and everyone's all excited. And they believe that this little town of Franklin Mills is going to be the big, big spot. Now, remember, Cleveland is very small, not built up yet. Akron is even smaller. And these guys think that Cleveland, Kent, is going to be the biggest place. Yes?
What bridge is that?
That's the Stowe Street.
That's the Stowe Street?
Yeah, it's right by the Stowe Street Bridge.
Is that before the Main Street Bridge was built the first time?
Yes, there was always a little bridge going somewhere,
Yeah.
but they were very crude. There was a crude bridge down at Crane Street, another crude bridge. It doesn't get to be really good till later. And so, okay, so here's the Franklin Silk Company. This was, I was redoing this, was the funniest story of all the things that I learned. We've been teaching this. Julia's our director here. We've been teaching, oh, there was a silk, and they thought they'd plant mulberry trees, and the silkworms froze, and we didn't have a silk company. Okay, it's a much funnier story than that. Just go on YouTube and see how silk is made. There was no way in hell they were going to have a silk factory here.
Right.
There was no way a woman was going to sit there and get silk out of a cocoon all day.
Right.
This was not happening. But these men, and this is where Zenas was very good. He had contacts in Cleveland. He had contacts back east. He knew how to really work with people. He didn't just know the guy next door. So he was a planner. But they were all on something because there was no way we were going to get a silk factory. But farmers bought all this land up and they planted mulberry trees. One farmer even bought this huge piece of land. He was going to build a cocoonery. Right, you're going to build a cocoonery. No idea how to get silk out, but they're going to build a cocoon. So because the Chinese silk is so expensive, they're gonna make a fortune. Not gonna work. Anyway, here's what we have, the dream of the silk mill. You call this the silk mill. It was only built as a foundation. It never was finished for another 40 years because it all collapsed. So we see this later, but it's also part of this huge plan that Zenas Kent has. Next. Okay, Zenas builds the town. He really builds the town. What do we have? We have the tracts of land, builds it, sells it. He sells it for $75,000. When everything falls apart, he gets all his land back. Zenas never lost anything, really. But that does not make him a bad entrepreneur. The one thing he did with the bank was he never sold more money than the bank was worth. So he had collateral, and no one who invested in that bank lost money. Everybody else lost money. Farmers lost money. John Brown lost money. John Brown bought 100 acres. Everything from Summit all the way down to where the John Brown Tannery is now, and over to where the shops are now. He owned everything for about 15 minutes, and then he went bust. He owned it. Okay, here he is. Here's old John. I've spent about 56 years reading about John. I've really been interested in him. I find him an incredibly complex character. He wanted, when he had his first wife, he had, I think, 8 or 10 children with his first wife. She had just died when he comes here to build the tannery. There's one little thing about Zenas I'm not crazy about. So Zenas seemed to indicate to John Brown that he was going to manage the tannery after he built it. When it opened, I found the original ad. It says, Zenas Kent announces the opening of his tannery built and designed by John Brown, run by Marvin Kent. He gives it to his son, who's 30 years, who's what?
26.
26 years old. So he was never going to give it to John. John was never good with money. He was a crazy man. He was a moral man, but he was not an entrepreneur in any way, shape, or form. But many people disliked him when we first came and talked negatively because he was a bad businessman. Now, if we just disliked John Brown because he was a bad businessman, we wouldn't like most people, because most people don't make money, right? They're not entrepreneurs. So that in and of itself is not a good reason. I was very upset about that. The first history we have, written by Christian Cackler, just decimates his character because he says he couldn't make money. My father lost money, went bankrupt. That's not a good reason. Give me another one. Another one is he couldn't make money. But these values, he leaves Franklin Mills. I talked to 2 different people who wrote biographies of John Brown and said, so what would have happened if he made money and all that 100 acres he turned into a really wealthy man? Do you think he would have still been an abolitionist? Would he have gone away to Kansas? The guy said, I have no idea. No one's ever asked that before. Well, I asked it because Franklin Mills was where he lost that last bit of money. It was also where he had gone and heard in Hudson a man talk about abolition. His son writes he came back to Franklin Mills that night and said to his children, we will die for slavery. So I think Franklin Mills was a pretty important part of his life. All right, the Fugitive Slave Act. I just want to make this point. We all write about the Underground Railroad. We all teach our children, well, at least this year, I don't know about next year, but we teach the Underground Railroad, and what we're teaching is breaking the law. Every single person who involved in the Underground Railroad was breaking the law. They could be jailed. After the Fugitive Slave Act, there was the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. You could be punished with a huge fine and you could be put in jail. So the people in Kent and in Franklin Mills at that time who pledged, there was known as a committee, and these men who were the scions of the small community, they helped people escape. And in one case, a child was so young that they left the child here, and the child grew up in Franklin Mills until his mother could return after the Civil War. So were there people who did not believe that slavery was a bad thing? I'm sure, but the predominant idea was abolitionist. So you didn't speak up too much, but it was still hidden. Okay, here we have the two documented in 1825, and the only house with any connection to the Underground Railroad is this on Fairchild. You probably know the house when you go down, it's right across from the water tower. That's the Woodard family, but it was built after the Underground Railroad. But it still is, as you see, very, very much of the style of that period. Okay, the committee, right. The committee was written about by, this was documented that there were certain men who drove the carriage, certain men that took them to Cleveland. Everybody knew their place. So it was very much a part of life here, but we are not a major part, okay? This is such a beautiful, beautiful building. Again, Zenas Kent. Who would build this size building in 1837? That's crazy. And there was nothing else downtown. It was empty. There was this building and a little brick building across, which I figure is where the Zephyr is, and the on that corner. They were the only brick building. This is a monster. It's beautiful, and it was considered the largest building in Northeast Ohio, possibly the largest building in Ohio of its size. And this was going to be the big commerce place to sell all that silk from all those little silk mills. Remember, all those women doing that silk every day. Okay, that building, by the way, as when the land collapsed, that building was almost empty. The story is they ran cows through it. It was so empty. It was huge, but there just were no people here. And the doctors, lawyers, everybody left. Some of the Irish people stayed, but most of them left. And so we have this big building. So here's the canal, and it gets finished, and the boom ends in 1840. It's over. Now, the boom and the bust of 1840, Henry, go to the next slide so I can see something. 1837, there are two things that I think now of. There are things that happen here that make Kent, and that there are things that happen outside of the state and the town that impinge and change us. The Panic of 1837 was why we had everything go down. The Panic of 1837 was worldwide. It was based on everybody buying land in Britain, France. People thought this was going to be a place to make a lot of money. So the plummeting of all of this was due to a severe national crisis, not just something that happened here. It was everywhere. It was what we would call a depression or recession. But the canal was finished. The canal was done. Next. The village becomes a railroad town. This is the second 30 years that are really important. In the beginning, just individuals. Then we have Marvin Kent, we have Zenas Kent, and now we have his son, who was equally as intelligent and equally a leader, but had fewer things to start. His big dream was not a canal, but a railroad. Because after the canal bust, everybody in the United States talked railroads. If you watched the Gilded Age, recently, it's all about railroads. It's going to be a lot of money. Because the dream is still get us connected to the rest of the world. and get Kent or Franklin Mills connected to as much as we can, to Chicago, to Cincinnati, to Erie, wherever it is. So we have him taking over his father's business at 32. He starts other things to get the water rights. And then in 1853, he starts this idea of the Atlantic and Great Western Railroad. And he is so mad because they built a railroad station, but it isn't in Kent. It's in, what's the name of the little, it's right outside of Kent. It's in Twin Lakes, basically. That we don't have a railroad station there. And he's furious. So he starts his railroad. And look at this, 1853. It takes 10 years to bring the railroad here. This was tenacious, patient. It was amazing. And he knew people everywhere. And he got most of his money from England. Not from here, from England. So he was really very different than the average person who had moved to Franklin Mills. So the railroad arrives finally in Kent in 1863. During this time is the Civil War. Now the Civil War, we'll talk about a little bit, but the railroad shops in 1865, why are we called Kent? Not because he brought the railroad, but because he brought jobs. Jobs are what people move here for. They don't move here for just a Cuyahoga. They got to make a living. So the shops are built, and the shops are amazing. They're actually building locomotives. We begin in 1867 to officially name our town Kent. Now, he didn't want to call it Kent. He didn't want to call it after himself. He wanted to call it Rockton. I don't know why. That's what the Masonic Lodge ended up being called. But we are so grateful that his name was Kent, because think if his name was Heckenschlepper. I mean, we'd all be living in Heckenschlepper. We'd have big, long, all the way around T-shirts. So we have this great town now. Now we're becoming a town. We're no longer just individuals. We're actually a town. We got a railroad, we got jobs, we got a bank. They all trusted him, so when they opened a bank, they put their money in it. We got a union school. I love the union school. After the Civil War, they built this huge building where Central School was, and they thought it would be good for decades. No, it was good for about 2 years. But it was free, and free education was extremely important. That was not everywhere. Again, values. Catholic and Universalist churches are built. All the churches were built on one side of the river except the Catholic Church. They were on the other side. I don't know whose choice that was. Same thing happened in the cemetery. Cemeteries all right here, Catholic cemeteries right in the middle, only the Catholics were buried in the middle. Now that's not true, where everybody's mixed up, except, I don't know, I haven't found too many Jews there, but maybe I just haven't looked in the right place. Kent Depot opens 1875. This year is the 150th anniversary of the depot. And of course, you know, we saved the depot, the Historical Society. Next year will be the 150th anniversary of the Stone Bridge. We're not doing anything about that. we're not having a big one. Okay, Marvin Kent takes over. We have all this happening. Kent Depot, Stone Bridge, it replaces the wooden bridge. Answer to your question, we're getting a great bridge. The real, Henry, tell the story of the bridge. You tell that better than I do. Why is the bridge important?
Well, at that time, most all the bridges that were built were only 30 feet wide. Marvin Kent, and we have no idea why, there's no documentation, said that's not going to be wide enough. We have to have a bridge that's wide enough so that carts, oxen carts, can go east and west and in both directions. Not only that, we have to have it so that people can walk across.
Sidewalk.
So we're going to add a 10-foot to a 40-foot wide roadway, we're gonna add another 10 feet on each side of that bridge so that people can also walk on it. If that hadn't been built to a 60-foot width, that Stone Arch Bridge probably would have been gone a long time ago. So it is, at least in the state of Ohio, it's the only stone arch bridge that's still in operation. There were other stone arch bridges that were built in the state, but they were not built 60 feet wide. So they met their maker and they were either taken down or other bridges were built to accommodate a wider ability.
So you see, Marvin again, just like his father, was a planner. He didn't know about automobiles. Maybe he was dreaming them, I don't know. But he was smart enough to see beyond.
We also had the stone for the bridge was taken from where the drive-through on Columbus is. Columbus and North Water Street was an area where the stone was taken to build the bridge. And again, we brought in Germans and Belgians to come who were good stonemasons, and they came, worked cheaply, of course, and built the bridge. And the building of the bridge it's a very interesting story, but that's for another time.
Okay, let's go. Now we're through, and now we're going, and just want to show you briefly this amazing shops that we had. At one point, 800 people worked there. And one of the things we always like to brag about is 1 out of 5 people were employed there. But as I redid this, I realized an even more important thing was 4 out of 5 had jobs here, could work here somewhere at some other little kind of mill or plant. So we were becoming a real town that was self-supportive. And?
I should also add, if you look at the lower left, the land that the shops occupied, if it's ever going to be reused in any way, shape, or form, has to be remediated. There are a lot of hydrocarbons that were used in the making of the engines and boxcars that were built there that had seeped into the ground. So you may have been reading about saving a building that's on there. That's all well and good, but to get that ground to have people live on it is going to require a few $1 million to remediate it for people to live on. For industrial use, doesn't have to be remediated to the degree that it would be remediated for people to live on. So,
okay, let's get a little bit, we're gonna get a little faster here.
yeah.
Because this is the train, beautiful yards. Absolutely, everybody was coming here and steam, but that's all.
There's one of the engines that was built here, and you can see A&GW Railroad on it.
Yeah, right there. Okay, Civil War, a very brief message. We were very pro-Civil War. People volunteered immediately. We had 161 men from Franklin Township, but 26 were killed or died. But most of these died or were wounded. We all mostly fought at a very, very important battle, the Battle of Franklin, Tennessee, where most, Henry, didn't they lose most of the?
It was a big loss for the South. It was one of the turning points of the Civil War was the Franklin.
Yeah. Okay, next. All right, so here we've got this beautiful, beautiful building. We have this building, which is the Union School, which turned out not to be built very well, and was up until this, well, I remember there've been, people who remember the Union School. They had a paddling room in the basement. Yes. Next one, Hen. Okay, this again, I want to go back to glass. We became one of the foremost manufacturers of glass in the country. Now, this is window glass, not beautiful, not decorative glass. And this is right on the river as you see it. If you want to find little pieces of glass, go between, Henry?
It's located where the farmer's market is. If you go to the other side of the fence, which I've done, you go down a few inches, you can find little shards of glass
Of
that
green
came
glass.
from that factory.
It's green glass there. So it was very, very successful. We had about 150. Belgium, when they went on strike, they went to Belgium, and they had Belgian Hill up Summit Street, and they were Belgian glass workers brought in, who wore the traditional clothes of Belgium, but they were cheaper than our people. So, again, the next, okay, go on. These are very important also, because they're iconic, but they're also part of our history that's very, very important. The Williams brothers were the only people we can find who actually built a better business than the Kent family. Their mill was much better than Marvin and Zetas' mill, and it put it out of business. And that's because the Williams brothers, who are also from New England, they helped to found their family Cambridge in Boston, very famous, but they came on the Mayflower. The Williams brother they went to Europe and they bought those mills. Explain that.
The Peerless Roller Mill, it was, the Peerless Company's still in business, as a matter of fact, and it was a much superior mill than the Kents had. And it created a very fine flour.
Very fine, mostly not bread, mostly for more, they used it for bread.
And that flour is still being made today.
Up in,
It moved to Willard, Ohio. The mill was still going when they moved. It didn't go out of business. It stayed in business, and it's still in business, but they moved it to where the cookie companies were that used the flour.
Archway.
And the town had grown up around our mill, and so they had a lot of trouble bringing in the trucks to get the flour. So
one 20th century fact. When May 4th happened, Mr. Williams was one of the people who wanted the guard to come in or wanted some kind of policing for this reason. The mill had flour dust, which is highly volatile. No one, I didn't know this until I did an oral history. If a fire had ever started at the flour mill, the entire town had to be evacuated because it would have possibly blown up. So when you think of May 4th, and I told this to someone about May 4th, they said, some people were actually worried that there could have been a fire that got out of hand. Oh no, it didn't get out of hand for 100 years. Why would they think there'd be a flour mill fire? Well, the reality is, now there isn't as much, obviously, but it was a very, very frightening idea that the trash cans, they didn't think it on fire would have been purposeful, but accidental. But it accidentally could have caused great problem in the town. Okay, Smith and Carriage Works, next one, and the Turner Apple. So now we become, in this last 20 years, this is how we become a community. And this is a lot from Jen Mape's book. When you have a community, you have all of these elements. We had roller rinks. We had people that came and sledded here. We had entertainment. We had an opera house. We had everything you want to have to be a town and a small town. So the Crane Street Bridge finally got that's a funny story. They ordered a metal bridge and it was 1 foot short. They had to send it back and get another one. But we had a Stowe Street Bridge, a Crane Street Bridge. We got an interurban that took us to Akron and took us to Brady Lake. We suddenly were total. So we get to the last part, Henry. The Marvin Kent House, here's some just great pictures. This is the only other building in town I lay down on the street to save. That is one of the great buildings that we have. Keep going, hon. Just wanted to put this in here. Look at this. 40 people in 1810. By the turn of the century, we are 4,500 people. We surpassed in 1870, finally surpassed Ravenna. We were so excited because Ravenna was naturally our rival. The rivalry of the high schools reflected the rivalry of the towns. And unfortunately, I don't crazy about that, but it is interesting how this happened. And the big changes happened because of the railroad. You see that right around there, but boom, because people had so many businesses. There are many more businesses I could tell you about the railroad, but I think I want you to just understand what what momentum that had. And here we go. I want you to remember back to an hour ago. These two people with 3 kids moved to a place with nothing but a river and a little building, wooden shack. And 100 years, 95 years later, this beautiful city, the 1880, that's an 1882 map of it. We were a town. And we had the possibilities of going into the 20th century with everything we needed. And we needed everything because everything was going to change in the 20th century. Everything that had happened in the 19th century was only going to happen in that century and would not take you through the 20th century. And if you invite us back, we'll get another, next year we'll tell you the rest of the story. But we are the most adaptable place. And we're surviving now because we are adapting all the time. And there are lots of small towns, even college towns, that aren't doing as well as we are. And we have to be prepared because everything is changing again. And the next big wave is coming, and none of us know what's going to happen in the next 10 years. It is not going to be how we grew up. It is not going to be how we imagine life. And so we have to be ready for it. And I hope we will be. Thank you.